Sweeping financial reform plan. They're calling it the possible, because we're not there yet, possible biggest reform in the financial markets since all the way back in the Great Depression. There have been a lot of things floated. What does David Castillo think of some of them? He is Senior Managing Director at Further Lane Securities. He's been out ahead of this with his own proposal called DART, Distressed Asset, what is it, the Distressed Asset Recovery Trust. Did I get the acronym right, David?
Distressed Asset Restructuring Trust.
Restructuring Trust. There you go. DART plan. He's got his own ideas. Pretty smart guy, and welcome you back, David. Thank you so much. First off, let's talk about your plan. Are you getting any traction? I know you've been to Washington. You've been meeting with people. What has been the reaction about your plan?
I think at this point in time, the Treasury as well as the FDIC is having trouble implementing anything else at this point, given the lack of, let's just say, success of the PPIP initiative, as well as the wind down that we're seeing with the TALF program. There's been significant participation, albeit in a limited amount of assets that can go in there. They've opened up CMBS now at this point in time. But I think there's a real hope that these green shoots that we see out there are multiplying. Unfortunately, I don't think that's the case, and we continue to try to make the case that without securitization, like we're suggesting in this DART program, it's going to be difficult to see this recovery, gain any strength in here.
Well, maybe you and the World Bank. If you don't believe the green shoots are necessarily catching hold, the World Bank coming out and basically lowering its global growth problem estimate down, I think, to 2.9% contraction for the global economy this year. Why do you not think these green shoots of recovery are taking hold?
Well, I think right now, I mean, when you look at what drives recovery or drives economic progress in any country, especially in the United States, it's a function of the consumer actually buying goods or services. At this point in time, the U.S. consumer continues to be impaired and continues to have a very poor-looking balance sheet. We don't have liquidity, i.e. credit, available to the U.S. consumer. I think if you look at what's happened, or even as your earlier interview, insofar as talking about people's credit scores and their availability of credit, it continues not to be available, and that's because the providers of credit don't have the excess capital available to make it to other people. The only place that you're seeing credit made available is in the auto industry to give away or I should say, sell cheaply the last cars that GM has on its books at this point, as well as what's left on Chrysler's books before they move into their new structure. But away from that, you really don't see any availability of credit out there. Yeah. The availability from a housing perspective has been quite limited. And they're going to have to continue to figure out a way, they being, the Treasury, the FDIC, are going to continue to have to find a way to get credit into the pockets of the U.S. consumer to get them moving. And I think it's that same way as well as in the ECB countries.
I'm glad you brought up housing, because that's exactly where I was going. You got two types of real estate, commercial and residential, on a rough scale. Commercial real estate, we know there's been multiple bankruptcies there. We've seen buildings sell for 50, major buildings, Hancock Center, sell for 50% of the value a couple of years earlier. Now, under this plan, they may require banks to hold some of the risk on mortgages. That sounds good, and probably they should. But yet, isn't there a dark side here in that if you got to hold the risk, you're much less likely to make the mortgage? What's going to happen to commercial and residential real estate?
Well, I'm thinking insofar as residential real estate or any sort of securitizations where the institution that originates the loans or the mortgages per se, they're going to have to retain more of that on their balance sheet. There's going to be a disincentivization to create those products, that is, make those loans available to consumer because of the pardon me, because of the amount of capital that have to be retained on the balance sheet. The same would be true for commercial real estate, and that's a real troubling sign, because having to retain more and more of the securitization themselves on the balance sheet and the commercial securitization will really, I think, deliquify the market. As it is right now, there's very little opportunities for borrowers in the consumer real estate market, that is businesses, to be able to roll over their loans, which typically are 5 or 10-year interest-only loans, which would then roll over in the future. And those loans that were made in, in the earlier part, 03, 04, 05, are starting to become needed to be rolled over, and there's no liquidity available there. Yeah, and what they're doing is they're selling a huge discounts or walking away.
We haven't had a major headline about this in the last 6 to 8 weeks, which means things are getting better, or, maybe I'm just cynical. I guess I've been doing this too long, that it's the calm before the second storm. I know there's a lot of, believe it or not, a lot of personal arm resets that are still to come. You just mentioned these commercial loans that need to be rolled over. Will there be a second leg?
Yeah, there is. Unfortunately, I think we are in the eye of the hurricane, and we're about to feel the winds of the backside of this hurricane coming through. And we're beginning to see it in the commercial market. There has been a tremendous amount of selling in that market, as well as with the index. There have been certain structural components of the CMBS market that have improved somewhat because of greater credit availability underneath the bonds that are issued, the A4, the supers tranches. But in general, that market's been hammered over the last 6 months, and it's going to get even uglier looking as we move forward. The amount of distressed CMBS or commercial real estate funds that has sprouted up in the last year will only lead you to believe that there's a lot of distressed real estate still coming out there. Those are professionals that know what they're doing, and they're getting ready to buy when things get ugly.
David Castillo, Further Lane Securities. David, always a pleasure. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Brian.
All right, we'll see you again soon. All right, still to come, more on regulatory reform. We're going to be speaking with the General Counsel of the NASDAQ OMX, kind of continue the discussion that we just had with David Castillo. We're going to analyze the securities part of it. Plus, Yahoo CEO Carol Barr